Welcome back to Redefine Parenting with your host, Veenu Keller. We want to welcome you to Spanglish World Network and her network on Zingo TV, channels 250 and 251. Zingo TV is a free app that can be downloaded on iOS and Android devices. While you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire and Fire Sticks, Roku and Roku Sticks, and all smart TVs 2016 and forward. Redefine Parenting is a revolutionary approach to nurturing our children. Veenu will bring you live experts, transformative insights, and a fresh perspective, all aimed at helping families worldwide truly understand their children. Together, let's give them a childhood they won't have to heal from. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Redefine Parenting. I'm your host, Veenu Keller, and I'm so excited to have my special guest on today because this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart and in my home. I have 6 kids, and 3 of them are diagnosed with dyslexia. And, our title of our show is I'm Not Dumb, I'm Dyslexic. And I really am excited to dive into this conversation because Jess with 3D Learning Experts is an expert at this. And there's more to just dyslexia than just dyslexia. There's a lot of other elements that I'm finding out that actually aid in our children having deficits in their learning abilities. And you know what? Honestly, kids aren't dumb. It's not their fault. It's the way their brain was made. And people like Jess make it better and easier for our kids to get through this. So without further ado, Jess, welcome to our show today.
Thank you, Veenu. I'm so excited to be here and be able to share with your audience about my experience.
I love that. I love that. So let's just dive in because I know I'm looking into using your services for my children because after our brief conversation, I finally see some light at the end of the tunnel. Like I really see that, what we've done in the past has worked, but then we hit these plateaus, and just talking to you helped me realize that there's ways to get past these plateaus and to help accelerate the learning. So let's just how do parents start to realize that their child might be dyslexic, and there's other dys stuff that was on your form that I don't even know how to pronounce.
Absolutely. So for me, my daughter was my second child. My first child was basically a child prodigy. At age 5 was reading. By second grade was reading on an 8th grade level. Then child number 2 comes along, and I was a preschool teacher at the time, and this child could not cut with scissors, could not spell, well, back then it wasn't spelling, could not draw stick figures, could not do what your average preschooler could do. So my journey started much earlier than people usually start to identify things, but it obviously can be picked up on very early on.
Right.
And really in brain scans, they can pick it up in babies now. But so when you start to notice things that are different, that is the time to start, delving into what could it be. Sometimes for only parents with only one child, it's harder to know these things or to see it early on because you don't have a comparison. However, if you have multiple children like you do, Veenu, you have twins, very often it's one twin will have signs of dyslexia and the other one will have none. Yours is actually probably the first time I've heard that both twins have dyslexia. But so that's parents with twins can very often see that their 2 children are learning differently or doing fine motor skills differently. My youngest son did not talk until he was 2.5. He grunted, and he had 3 older siblings. We all knew what the different grunts meant, and we served him accordingly, which was a disservice to him. And so at 2.5, I finally said, we're done. We're not going to respond to his grunts. And he started speech therapy at 2.5. And that is one of the characteristics of dyslexia, although it can be a characteristic of autism, and he actually has both. So, sometimes we may not know what it is early on, but let's start looking at it and not just ignoring it. Because very often, when a child reverses things or is struggling to read in school, the response is wait until third grade. And by then, you've lost 4 years that you could have been helping your child avoid frustration and their reduced confidence level. Although we've had students who, as early as kindergarten, already have issues with confidence because they can tell that they're not reading yet and the other kids are starting to read. So, the confidence is a huge thing that parents can often notice earlier on.
Yeah, for me, the kids were both they went to a private school where it's combination classes, and they were in second grade, and the teacher just noticed that they weren't up to par. Like their reading levels were not up to par. And, I thought they were doing great, like, because nobody was saying anything in the other schools they were at, because we had just switched schools. We were a public school. And they were in a Spanish immersion class. So everything was in Spanish. The kids were coming home. They were saying the Pledge of Allegiance in Spanish. So I had no idea until the teachers and I were talking at the private school, and they're like, something's not right. Like, I think we need to see, is it ADHD? What is it? And my husband has dyslexia, and his daughter has dyslexia. And so I said, I took him to a psychologist who diagnosed him with ADHD. And then we did further testing, and we didn't know if it was oh gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? A processing disorder.
Mm-hmm.
So we took him to get tested on processing disorder, but they passed that. And I said, I had a friend, and she's like, I'm curious if it's dyslexia. And she says, because sometimes the symptoms of ADHD can mock issues that come with dyslexia. And she is dyslexic. And I went to school with her. And so she says, why don't you contact this agency, which I did. I contacted a couple of them, and I went with this one agency, and they got tested. And sure enough, they both had dyslexia. And so we decided that we were going to hold them back and let them do another grade of second grade. Well, interesting enough, my son, who really wanted to be with his friends and go on with his friends to the next grade, he actually did the third grade work and was passing. And we got him in the program that we did. They helped him come up 6 reading levels in 6 weeks, helped her come up 6 reading levels in 6 weeks. But he ended up doing the third grade work and passing third grade. So he actually didn't get held back. She, on the other hand, I said, you're going to get left behind. Do you want to be doing more? She goes, oh, I love Miss Jones. I'm okay being in her class again. And so she was literally okay. And honestly, it worked out the way it did. And some people ask me, having twins, is it hard that one's at a different grade the other? And I said, no, because I'm not letting judgment of that take away from setting my kids up to win. He's doing great in 7th grade, and 6th grade is still a challenge for her. And I always thought he had it worse than she did. But honestly, she struggles with mathematics, and hers is retaining information. And that's where he does better. He can retain the information. He can continue to show, like, once he learns it, he has like a photographic memory that he's always remembered things, which she does not have.
Right.
But it comes back down to the comprehension. It's like what they read, they can't retain to make sense to answer questions.
Well, in dyslexia, very often people have memory issues. So your son having a photographic memory is amazing. I know I have wished to have that because I hear people say things and they just remember names of programs or names of medicine or recipes. And I can't remember any of those things. I mean, I'm lucky when I can remember my children's names. So, um, that's my challenge with dyslexia is remembering names and titles and things like that. So the fact that he could remember is probably why he was able to retain everything so quickly. The program you used, I find very difficult for people with dyslexia because most dyslexic people have memory issues. And so it's really hard for them to retain all the information that they receive in such a short period of time.
Right, right. And I can see that too. And his issue now is comprehension. It's making sense with the information he's receiving
Uh-huh.
in his brain to understand how to do whatever with it. But for my daughter, it definitely, and it goes back to self-esteem too. And when she's asking questions and kids are looking at her like you're dumb, like they just answered that. And the teacher did answer it, but they answered it in a way that did not comprehend and make sense to her.
Well, and self-esteem is a huge thing. Be, for that reason and so many others. Like for me, when I was held back, that really hurt my self-esteem. So I heard you say that for you, it doesn't matter that your two twins are in different grades. But I wonder if deep down, if it's hard on your daughter emotionally. I know I was held back and I held my daughter back because that's what the teachers recommended I do. And I regret it. I always encourage parents not to hold their kids back because when you hold back a dyslexic child, that doesn't give them more time to improve. They don't need more time in their traditional learning style. More time does not equal improvement. It is being taught in a different way that equals the improvement, and it doesn't have to take a long time to learn the information, right? Like your kids learned it in a matter of weeks. Now retaining it was a different story,
Right.
but because dyslexic people are bright, and so they're able to learn when they're taught in a way that is appropriate for them. They're able to learn really quickly.
Yeah.
um, and so for my daughter, she was the oldest kid in her grade when she was, or an older kid in her grade when she was in her correct grade. And then when she got held back, she was a year and a half older than
Mm.
most of the kids. So she dealt with that until I finally started homeschooling her and then was actually able to graduate the year she was supposed to. But so I find holding them back is really, it's hard on the self-esteem.
I can appreciate that. And so for what we did, um, and I'm lucky because my daughter is we could have we didn't have to start them when we did because they have a late birthday.
Uh-huh.
So they're either the youngest in the class or the oldest in the class, but they're still the same age range, thank God.
Okay.
So that did not affect them. The
Uh-huh.
other
That's
thing
fine.
is that because they're twins and they have to share everything, we've made it that they don't have to share now. And she loves her friends and they're still in the same class. They're just different grade levels because they're combination class.
Oh, that's nice.
They've stayed with their friends. And now in high school, it's going to be a different deal because they're not going to be combination classes. But um, they, we've also taught her that she gets to have her own, and she does like having her own. So she's good to have her own graduation. She doesn't have to share it, and she doesn't have to share prom, and she doesn't have to share all these things that are going to mean something to her as she gets older. And so, and we've explained it to her in a way that he's not smarter than you. That's not what happened. He just learned quickly
Hmm.
and you needed more support. And so we've really worked on her self esteem. I think what gets her is when she doesn't understand it in her mind, she should understand it because everyone else around her understands it.
And that's a very common thing I hear with our students because the way school is taught nowadays, it wasn't that like that when I was a kid. You've got the row of books from A to Z, and everyone knows who are the A readers and who are the L readers, and the A readers that are not progressing to become P readers or whatever.
Mhm.
So, that's why it's so apparent to kids in as early as kindergarten, because the way they have schools set up, it's just, I don't know why they have to do it that way, but I think it's a disservice to the kids who struggle.
Yeah, because when I was growing up, we had reading groups, and nobody knew which reading group was what. They didn't know if it was the upper level reading group. And it's funny because when I was talking to my friend Amy, who's been on my show, and we talked about dyslexia, it wasn't. I mean, I think maybe 5 years ago, I realized that I was in the class for slower kids, and I'm like, but no, I was so smart. And she goes, because you were in my class, like I was in the class with slower kids. I'm like, I had no idea. I just thought I was really smart in that class, but I did have challenges. I too had to go to reading clinic to help with comprehension, and I don't know if I have dyslexia or not. Maybe I do, and I just have always gone undiagnosed with it. I
Mhm.
definitely have ADHD. And but reading comprehension, a lot of that was, hard for me. It was hard for me to understand what I was reading and to staying on task of understanding what I was reading and reading all words and remembering what it was I read. So, and I want to just also talk about, you have other things that I don't know how to pronounce when they have mathematical issues and writing issues. Dyspraxia, I think, is that one of them?
Well, no, dyspraxia is
The language.
when no well, yeah, dyspraxia is when they can't communicate. We have a
Right.
couple of students with dyspraxia. However, our other two services that we help are with dysgraphia, which is difficulty with writing, and that can be, we don't do the handwriting part, but dysgraphia can be difficulty with handwriting. It can be difficulty taking the thoughts from your mind and putting it on paper, and that's the part we help with that note taking. And then we dyscalculia is the other one, which is difficulty with math, calculating.
Nice. That's it. Dyscalculia. Like when I saw that, I was like, oh my God, I think my daughter has that, you know? And it's interesting because school districts will not recognize dyslexia for their IEPs. Like
Right.
it's mind blowing. And that's one of the things that my friend Amy is such an advocate on, is like, why are schools not recognizing that this is a real learning disability?
Well, here's the thing. In 1979, when the federal government decided to start offering special ed services, and they said, we're going to pay half, and the states are going to pay half. They did not expect dyslexia to be part of it. And so actually the prior to recently, most of the research that was done in America was done by the Board of Education. And they
Mhm.
didn't share any of this information because they don't want to be on the hook for 20% of their students to provide services to them. So that is why they don't put dyslexia on there. They don't, it's a financial thing.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
so interesting. And it's such a disservice.
Absolutely. Mississippi, which was last time I looked, I don't know if it's changed, but they were the worst school system in the country. They decided to start improving their school system by testing for dyslexia in kindergarten. And so now, when they're testing in kindergarten, they can start to help the kids who need the help earlier on than any other state does. So my kids were diagnosed in Texas, where they actually provide the tutoring services, group classes in school. And so each state is kind of doing their own little thing, some more than others. Some are getting it better than others. I heard that there's one state where I think where they're starting to incorporate an Orton Gillingham base instruction in kindergarten, which makes total sense. I mean, that could really help the younger kids, all kids,
Oh,
but help the younger kids with dyslexia and not even feel like they're any different because everyone's being taught in a multi-sensory environment.
Right. So I'm curious, how does your program, 3D Learning Experts, like, how are you guys really getting into helping kids with dyslexia and seeing improvement where they're retaining what they're learning from your tutors to progress? Because the other program that I've used, you said that's not really great for dyslexia because the retainment's not there. So what are you doing differently than all these other programs that are out there?
I mean, I, so any other program that uses an Orton Gillingham based and uses it properly and does it one on one is doing it right for a person with dyslexia. So
Okay.
it's not just me. I don't want to, claim that. But the big difference between what we're doing and your box tutoring centers, or, the program you went to for the 8 weeks, is we're using an Orton Gillingham based program, which is multisensory. So we are teaching them, even though we're 100% virtual, we're teaching them with tiles. They're moving tiles on the screen. The tutor is telling them what they need to know. Then they're repeating back what they need to know. Then they're moving it. There's repetition involved. Repetition is probably the most important thing you can do for someone with dyslexia, but it needs to be the right instruction. But repetition is so important. And that's one of the things that's missing from the program that you used, is they're not going to have that repetition. They're just learning it all. And if they can retain it, then great. So let's see, it's multisensory, it's repetition, it's sequential. So we don't teach silent E's until 2/3 the way done with our program. Silent E's are introduced in kindergarten books, but that's a very complex step. So we're not going to start with that step. We start with sounds, and then from the sounds, we move on to short vowel sounds and consonants. And from there, we move on to long vowel sounds and short vowel sounds and when to use them. And then it gradually, they go from 2-syllable words up to 6-syllable words, but over time. It takes a couple of years. But at the end of the couple of years, our students, if they finish our program, are reading on at least an 8th grade level. Most of them are reading on an 11th grade level. The average American graduates reading on an 8th grade level. So that's huge.
What does that even mean? Like when we're telling people that for the audience, because this is worldwide, right? In different countries too. What does it mean to be on an 8th grade level? Is that like the fluctuation of the words? Is it the understanding, being able to answer questions? Like, what does that even mean? 8th grade level, 11th grade level.
So the way I always explain it to parents, and I don't know if this will translate well in other countries, but because that is the highest expectancy rate for public school students to graduate on, that is what the community college reading level is. So if your child goes to community college in America, they are going to be expected to read 8th grade level. So those are words that, are 4 or 5 syllables. They're not real complex words. University in America is a 10th or 11th grade reading level. So if you have someone who graduated high school on an 8th grade reading level, they're going to struggle with their reading if they go straight to a university, because that is too challenging for them. Another example is most, if not all, of the tests that are given in America are written for an 8th grade reading level. So my husband was a mortgage lender for years, and you didn't need a license to be a mortgage lender until after 2008. Well, after that, they started requiring tests. My husband could not pass the mortgage exam, even though he knew how to do mortgages left and right, but he didn't know how to read on an eighth grade reading level because he is profoundly dyslexic. So he kept failing that test. And the same thing, the cosmetology test, probably the firefighters test, most of your tests for people who are going into, what's it called? Trades are going to be on an eighth grade level. So because that's what they expect, and prison prisons in America are, they want to make sure they have enough prison cells based on the third grade class in another, what is that, 8 years. So in America, they really look at what the reading levels are of the students, and their expectancy rate of more people in prison are based on the reading level of the third graders from 8 years earlier.
Interesting. That's so interesting. And what I find most interesting about reading levels is that whether I can read a word or not, I don't think that should have to do with my reading level. It's, do I comprehend what I'm reading? Like, where does comprehension come in?
Well, what I find a lot of times is a lot of dyslexic people can read the words, but they don't understand what the word means. And so in our program, we make sure as we're teaching the kids these words as they get bigger and bigger, that they understand the meaning of the words. Because yeah, it's one thing to be able to read a word. It's another thing to understand what the word means so that you can contextualize what you've read. And the IEP tests or the ARD tests for Texans, what I found with my second youngest child who has profound dysgraphia, they didn't pick up on that at all because they have you read and then you just have to write a little paragraph, or you have to answer multiple choice questions for the reading. So it's really not, those tests are not appropriately diagnosing someone who is moderately dyslexic or dysgraphic or dyscalculic, because they're not looking at the full picture. They're just taking a little snapshot of it.
So, is there a certain way that kids with dyslexia should be tested in order to really figure out if they really understand what's going on versus taking that test and not doing well on it?
Well, for me, I don't even need a child to take a test to be able to determine if it's dyslexia. I, and the same thing with my daughter's teacher, who identified that my daughter was dyslexic, because it's just a conversation with the parents that can clearly let me know if it's dyslexia or not. And the same thing with dysgraphia and dyscalculia. If a parent describes the challenges that the child is having, that's going to give me a clear answer as to whether it's dyslexia. So that checklist you talked about, that's all I need to know if it's dyslexia. Some people are huge on getting the official diagnosis. For me, it's not important. Now, two of
Yeah.
my children have official diagnoses, but I don't have an official diagnosis. My husband doesn't have an official diagnosis. My son, who's moderately dyslexic, doesn't have an official diagnosis. Now, my son, who's moderately dyslexic, I didn't even know he was dyslexic. He was helping me set up for a presentation years ago. And he then said, "Well, do you want me to stay?" And I was like, "Yes, please," because I'm technically challenged. And he stayed and he listened to my presentation. And afterwards, he said, "I think I'm dyslexic." Because he had a lot of the characteristics that I was describing. And so those are really the key components. And you don't need to have a ton, and it's different for every person, but it's those that's how you can determine it. Does your child struggle to spell? That one seems to be Number one. And I asked you that today because you said your daughter reads well. And there are dyslexic people who do read well, but most dyslexic people cannot spell well because
Yeah.
spelling is so much harder than reading. Because reading, you just have to memorize the words, but spelling, you've got to, pull it out from your arsenal of knowledge and memory in order to spell words correctly.
Right. It was interesting because I was telling you about my one of my best friends, Amy, who helped me realize that my kids were dyslexic. And I forget what she called it, but they were like gibberish words. And
Nonsense words.
yes,
That's what
nonsense.
we call them.
Yeah, nonsense words. And my kids couldn't do it. And she goes, they're they're probably dyslexic.
Yeah,
Like
and
I
that's
could tell
because
her behavior, and she was like, "They're probably dyslexic." And again, she's been my biggest resource. I love her, um, but she's dealt with it her whole life. She's advocated for her son, who actually is a firefighter. So it's funny that you said that. Yep. And so and she is a huge advocate for this because it's again, how do we get this in the schools to even participate, to not make it a numbers thing, but to make it that we are educating and creating these kids to be productive people of society because we're educating them in the right way, giving them the opportunity to learn in the way that their brain needs to learn.
right. Well, and the way to get into the schools is not hard. The part that's hard is to get the schools to change. I mean, schools have been functioning the same way for 200 years. And schools were started originally to transfer people from being farmers to being industrial workers. Well, we don't need those anymore. We need creative people to come up with new things. But our educational system is so far behind. And so, if they were to change it to start incorporating multisensory, systematic, and structured instruction, kids would all be able to succeed and learn to read. Because a lot of times I've found that some dyslexic students don't even, they just need a basic foundation. And from that, they're able to have the motivation to be successful. But what happens is when they're not given the proper foundational tools that they need, they lose any motivation that they have and they just give up. And very often they're told you're dumb, you're lazy, you're stupid by teachers, by parents, by peers. And so then they give up. Why should I even try if everyone's going to call me names anyway? Let me just be the class clown and entertain everyone.
Right. To get some significance somewhere.
Right.
Right.
Because they'd rather be laughed at for being funny than laughed at for being
Not
stupid.
Yeah, not getting it.
Right.
And it's interesting because like my daughter has no organizational skills whatsoever. And it's, as a parent, it's frustrating. It's like, how many times and how easy is it? Like, they literally have a checklist that you go online every day because everything's online. And then you write down in your agenda, Monday, this is due, Tuesday, this is due, and then you check it off. That is a difficult task for her.
Yeah. I understand.
And it's
When
so frustrating. And I
when
feel
my
bad that it's frustrating, but it's frustrating. It's like, that is such a simple thing. Like, it's all there for you.
but it's not simple for
It's
the
not for her.
dyslexic person. When my kids were in school, we had to buy those things that you're talking about. My kids never used them. I couldn't help them to use them. Because we were in a household full of dyslexic people. And so we bought them and they took them to school every day, but they never filled anything in. I created these little flip cards that are tactile.
Mhm.
You can print them out, you can color them if you want, you can draw your own, you can put them on a little metal ring
Right.
and then flip through to make sure you've done your stuff. And that's a lot easier than to have to get online, take that extra step to get online and check the things off.
Interesting. So everything, it sounds like you do, you incorporate more than just mind power. It's feeling, it's tactile, it's moving. It's like muscle memory
Yeah.
almost.
Yeah. The more senses you incorporate into anything your child is learning, the more they're apt to retain that information.
Right. Right.
So, like, if you have them do jumping jacks and practice their spelling words, they're more apt to remember them, because the average dyslexic person can memorize their spelling words for the test. But 3 weeks later, when they do the review of the sight words or the spelling words, they have no recollection whatsoever.
I think the hardest thing for my daughter to learn to this time and age is the ers, the ers, the irs, the ars. Like they all make the same, and it was so hard for her. And understanding that there's 7 days in a week and there's 30 days in a month, and understanding it, and like we were like, oh, your grandma's coming. Oh, when? And I'm like, oh, in December. She goes, oh, is that 2 weeks from now? We're like, what?
My 22-year-old still struggles with that, still to this day. um he he's gotten much better, but it's still a challenge for him. When my daughter went to cosmetology school, we I made her flashcards that had the days of the week. It had the months in order, so that she could practice this, because she didn't want to go off to cosmetology school not knowing what order the days of the week were in. But yeah, that's a common challenge for profound dyslexics. It's not something you're going to see in a moderate or mild dyslexic person.
Yeah, and I think, like, again, not trying to compare, but like her brother who has dyslexia, he can tell the time on a analog clock. He knows the days of the week. He knows that it's, and it does not help her when she's like, duh, because he's doing, and we have to be like, not nice, not
Yeah,
nice. Just because she doesn't get it doesn't mean she's dumb. It just means she
right.
doesn't get it.
And before we, get off of this subject, I want to say that there's a lot of challenges that people with dyslexia have. However, they have really strong suits that other people don't have as well.
Let's
So
talk about
that's
those.
what's that?
Let's talk about those.
Okay. So dyslexic people are often three-dimensional thinkers. So the name of my company is a play on words. It's 3D for dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia, but it's also because we're three-dimensional thinkers. We can figure out everything, not just like what's right in front of us. We think about, okay, how's that going to affect this, and how's that going to affect that, and where. So that's a skill that a lot of dyslexic people will have. Now, again, all of the gifts are not going to be the same in everyone. A lot of dyslexic people are very intuitive. They're very good at communicating with other people. They are insightful. They make great actors. They make great athletes. They make great firefighters. They make great salespeople. So these are gifts that dyslexic people have. And very often the gifts don't shine until they are adults, because their primary job as kids is school, and school is not created for the dyslexic person. And even job training these days is no longer for the dyslexic person. When Leonardo da Vinci was alive, that they had mentors, and they would be an apprentice for several years. That is a perfect way for a dyslexic person to learn a skill. And so, like, Leonardo da Vinci was dyslexic. And if you look at his notes, there are clear cut signs that he was a dyslexic person. So, but he was alive in a time that he was given an opportunity to shine, you know, because things were different back then.
Yeah, I'm going to say, I think one of the gifts that I see in my children and even my husband is the artistry in them.
Mm-hmm.
Like my daughter, since at a young age, she would take a nightgown and without cutting, sewing, nothing, she would make it into like 5 different outfits. And I'm like, how are you doing that? Like, I thought she was a genius. Like, how are you doing
She
that?
is.
My her brother, her twin brother, we had the child lock on the inside. He would take his blanket and he would make a pulley out of it and open the door. I'm like, that's ingenious. Like, how do you know to do that? Like, what would even make you think if I put my blanket around this, I can open the door? Like little things like that that I remember. And I was like, wow. And back then I had no idea dyslexia. I didn't even think about dyslexia. The teachers say, hey, the kids aren't reading. Like, what's going on? Oh, they're ADHD. They have this like motor that just doesn't stop. And again, if it wasn't for one of my best friends, Amy, if she didn't ever, talk to me about it, and she's like, I really think this, I would never have even known. And that's really why I want to bring you on this show, is because like you said, the sooner we know, the better off we're going to be in teaching our kids. And so, what are the signs that these kids, and you said like spelling, if spelling is an issue, like that's one thing. Reading, is there other things that parents can look at, like other behaviors maybe that these kids are going through, that we might be like, hey, maybe we need to look at this and see if they are dyslexic?
Right. Yeah. So, memory challenge for me. So, it's even though I've been talking about dyslexia, immersed in the world of dyslexia for over a dozen years, I can't tell you all the signs. However, we have a free checklist that I'm happy to share with you, and you can go through that checklist. And the checklist starts with preschool and goes up to college age. So some of them may not be appropriate. However, struggling to learn to tie shoelaces, it was a huge one. Kids don't tie shoelaces as much, so that's a harder one to be able to tell. For my daughter, she couldn't cut with scissors. She couldn't draw pictures. Like, her fine motor skills were not developed. Ear infections,
My
oddly enough, is one. Um, Late in speaking, a relative who has similar challenges is a huge one. Someone who doesn't like to read as an adult. Like, I try to think about which of my husband's parents would be the dyslexic gene. I think it's the father, because I've never seen him pick up a book, but my mother-in-law used to read little magazines and books, novellas. So that is a good indicator for your parents. Like, if your parents don't want to talk about it, or they've already passed, you can kind of look at that. Like, did I ever see my parent read? Because most people will read for pleasure. But if reading is hard, you are not going to pick up a book to read for pleasure. Um, let's see, what are some other
I don't
things?
know. You're saying this list. I'm like, oh my gosh, am I dyslexic? Maybe I am, and I've never been diagnosed because I do not like to read. It's always
Well,
been a difficult thing for me. I don't like to read, but I'm like, I can't be dyslexic because I've got this far in life and I didn't have this special help. But some of the things that you're saying, I really could probably check off the checkbox and for me.
yeah. Miss Mix up things like was and saw, and words like confidence and constitute. That, if they start this with the same letter and end with the same letter, they might say a totally different word. Or they're reading a book that has a picture of a house in it, and on one page they read HOM as home, and on the HOME, sorry, and on the next page they read HOME as house, because they're not really reading it. They're
Mm.
just looking at the pictures and kind of picking up on a couple of words. Um, when you're reading, you might skip lines. Maybe you use your finger to help guide you. Those are some of the signs. Now, you can go over the checklist that you filled out for your daughter and see for yourself. And if you have at least 3 signs, it's probably dyslexia.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, it depends on the 3 signs. Now, if it's ear infections, messy bedroom, and I don't know, some other random thing, then that could be anything. But if it's ear infections, relative with dyslexia, and um, and say words like whatchamacallit. That's another one. Then it's probably dyslexia. But
Right.
most people have more than three signs anyway.
Right. And I until I saw dyscalculia, I think that's what it's called, right? Dyscalculia.
Uh huh.
I never even heard of that word
Most
until you
people
said
have
that.
that. Yeah.
And I just thought it was all dyslexia because, she was having a hard time with math because she's like, I know it's 31. I put 31 and actually she put 13,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a hard thing. And so she wasn't doing great on her visual online math program because I would sit down and do it with her and I'd say, okay, what's the answer? And she'd tell me verbally. I'm like, okay, put the answer down. And I'd literally watch her put the opposite. Like it wasn't 41, it was 14. But she put the 41. It was like so much. And I was like, when I read your checklist, I'm like, oh my gosh, I think it's more than dyslexia. I think it's dyscalculia. I think she really has that.
And I didn't mention reversals as a sign of dyslexia because it truly isn't. And I try to stay away from saying that because so many people think dyslexia is reversing. If my child doesn't reverse, they are not dyslexic. And most of our students only reverse a few letters or numbers. It's really not that predominant. And like we talked about when we met a while ago, my youngest son, after I had tutored him, he was on an 11th grade reading level. He still reversed half of the alphabet and numbers. And he went to vision therapy for that. And after going through a year and a half of vision therapy, he no longer reversed any numbers or any letters. So that could be the cause of her reversing rather than it being dyslexia or,
Right.
I mean, being dyscalculia. I mean, not to say that she wouldn't have that as well.
Well, there's more, but but her brother, like you said, her brother doesn't reverse. He's not a reversal. And it's funny because that's such a cliche, right? Like it's such a stereotype. Like, oh, well, like you said, oh, they don't reverse, so they're not dyslexic. Like I reversed my B's and my D's like most of my childhood. Like it was such a hard thing for me to remember. But I really feel like that's not it. That's not a way to say if my kid's dyslexic or not if you don't reverse. I think
Right,
that that's just some kids have it with dyslexia and you
right,
can have it without it,
right,
you
right,
know?
exactly.
So I think that's that really important. We only have a couple minutes left. So how could people find you when because I would highly recommend Jess, by the way, for my listeners to have a conversation, go check out this free checklist that she has. So how would they find you, Jess?
Yeah. So you can send us an email at hello@3dlearningexperts.com. You can give us a phone call if you'd rather talk than type. It's 888-678-2482. You can also find us on all of the social outlets. On Facebook, there's no S at the end of 3D Learning Expert, but the rest of everywhere else, there's an S. We had a glitch on Facebook and we can't add the S. It's unfortunate, but we're on YouTube. I have a podcast and a YouTube channel with lots of great videos about dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. This month is Dyslexia Awareness Month. So we've got lots of wonderful resources. I do a webinar every quarter. My goal is to help educate parents as to what dyslexia is, as well as to intervene through virtual tutoring. So,
Right. And I love that you're virtual. So just so you all know, I'm in North Carolina and I believe you're on the West Coast somewhere,
yep,
right?
California.
California. Hey, so is my friend Amy. All the best people with dyslexia are there. Um, so she does it virtually. And so please reach out, get support now, or like she said, the earlier the better. And I'm so glad that you were on my show today, Jess. You gave so much information that I think parents really need to start recognizing that sometimes their behavior is not because they just feel like not listening to you. They just don't feel like, having a behavior. Sometimes other things are going on. So
Mhm.
it's great to not get a diagnosis, but to really be open to seeing what's really going on.
Yeah. I'd rather see parents invest the money in helping their kids than invest the money in having a label that the school won't do anything with anyway.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you again, Jess, for being on our show. Thank you, listeners, for joining in. See you next week.
Thank you for having me.
Us on another episode of Redefine Parenting with Veenu Keller. Follow her on Instagram at Veenu Inspires. To learn more about Veenu, as well as download her free ebook now, go to www.veenuinspires.com. This show can also be heard on Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out www.spanglishworld.ca for all your news and programming. Spanglish World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it.